Mr. McPherson, please come with me. Don't sign anything else. Linda's voice was barely above a whisper as she placed her hand firmly on my forearm, stopping me mid-signature at the banking counter. Her eyes darted toward the glass-walled office in the corner, then back to me with an intensity I'd never seen in all my years banking at this branch. I looked down at the withdrawal slip in front of me, the same routine transfer I'd been making every month to cover Teresa's salary. My caregiver, the woman my brother Douglas had hired 8 months ago after my hip surgery when I couldn't manage on my own. I don't understand, I said, confused. The TD Bank branch on West 4th Avenue in Kitsilano was quiet for a Tuesday afternoon. Just one other customer at the far end, scrolling through her phone while waiting for a teller. Linda Okonkwo had been the branch manager here for almost 12 years. She'd helped Margaret and me set up our retirement accounts, had sent flowers when Maggie passed from the stroke 2 years ago, had personally called to check on me after my surgery. She wasn't the type to cause a scene. Please, Mr. McPherson, my office, now. Her grip on my arm tightened slightly, and I noticed her hands were trembling. I followed her past the teller stations, through the staff door, and into her corner office overlooking the street. Outside, the March rain was falling steadily, turning Kitsilano into that particular shade of gray that Vancouverites know so well. Linda closed the door, then the blinds, then sat heavily in her chair. "Bill," she said, dropping the formality we usually maintained, "how long have you known me? 12 years? Maybe 13. And in all that time, have I ever given you reason not to trust me? Never." "What's this about, Linda?" She opened her desk drawer and pulled out a thick manila folder. My name was printed on the tab in bold letters. Macpherson, William J. 3 weeks ago, a woman came in with a power of attorney document, claiming to act on your behalf. She wanted to liquidate your RRSP and transfer the funds to a new account. My stomach dropped. "What woman?" She said her name was Teresa Reyes. Said she was your live-in caregiver and that you'd given her financial power of attorney due to cognitive decline. I felt the blood drain from my face. I never signed any power of attorney. My mind is perfectly fine. I know. Linda slid the folder across the desk. That's why I didn't process it. Something felt wrong. You and Margaret were always so careful, so organized. You came in person for everything important. So I told her there was a problem with the paperwork and that she'd need to come back. I opened the folder with shaking hands. Inside was a photocopy of a power of attorney document, dated 6 months ago, bearing what appeared to be my signature, witnessed by my brother Douglas and notarized by someone named Patricia Hendricks. "I never signed this," I said again, but my voice came out hollow. "I know you didn't. I pulled your signature cards from our files." She placed 2 cards side by side. "Look at the W in William. You've always had that distinctive loop at the top. This signature doesn't have it. It's close, Bill, very close. But it's not yours." I stared at the documents, my 40 years as a forensic accountant kicking in despite the shock. She was right. The forgery was good, professional even, but there were tells. The pressure points were wrong. The spacing between letters was too uniform, like someone had practiced from a sample. "There's more," Linda said quietly. She pulled out bank statements, a stack of them, covered in yellow highlighter marks. After she left, I started looking at your accounts, really looking. Over the past 8 months, there have been 17 wire transfers totaling just over $340,000, all to the same account, all authorized with your online banking credentials. I don't do online banking. I've never even set it up. Someone did. 6 months ago. The recovery email is registered to a Teresa Reyes. My hands were shaking so badly that the papers rattled. $340,000. That was nearly a third of my retirement savings, money Margaret and I had spent 40 years accumulating. Money I'd planned to leave to charity, to the Stroke Research Foundation I'd been donating to since Maggie died. Why didn't anyone catch this earlier? Linda's face fell. The transfers were small. $15,000, $22,000, $18,000, just under the reporting threshold, spread out over months. Whoever designed this knew exactly what they were doing. I thought about the past 8 months. Teresa arriving at my door the day after Douglas suggested I needed help. Douglas, my younger brother by 7 years, who'd struggled financially his whole life. Douglas, who'd asked me for money 4 times since Maggie died and had been refused each time because I'd already given him over $200,000 in loans he'd never repaid. Douglas, who'd been so insistent that Teresa was exactly what you need and that I shouldn't worry about the business side of things. My brother, I said, the words tasting like ash. This is my brother. Linda nodded slowly. I didn't want to assume, but the power of attorney lists him as the secondary agent. And the account receiving the transfers? It's held by a numbered company. I couldn't trace it through normal channels, but I have a contact at FinTrack. The company's sole director is Douglas McPherson. I sat in that office for a long time, watching the rain streak down the windows. 40 years I'd spent catching fraudsters, following paper trails, testifying in court about financial crimes. And I'd missed this. My own brother had been stealing from me for 8 months, and I'd been too trusting, too grateful for the help, too lonely after losing Maggie to see what was right in front of me. What do I do? I finally asked. Linda leaned forward. You need to go to the police. You need to change all your passwords, revoke any powers of attorney on file, and get a lawyer. Today, if I do that, they'll know I'm onto them. Bill, they've already taken $340,000, and that power of attorney Teresa tried to use? If she'd succeeded, she could have liquidated everything. Your RRSP, your TFSA, your investment accounts. You're worth about $2.8 million on paper. They want all of it. $2 wit million. The house in Kitsilano that Margaret and I had bought for $180,000 in 1987, now worth $2.1 million thanks to Vancouver's insane real estate market. The retirement savings, the investments, Margaret's life insurance payout that I'd never touched because spending it felt like betraying her memory. All of it. They wanted all of it. I need proof that will hold up in court, I said, the accountant in me taking over. Right now, we have suspicious transactions and a forged document. A good lawyer will argue Teresa acted alone, that Douglas had no knowledge. I need them to admit it. Bill, that's dangerous. These people have been planning this for months, and I've spent 40 years putting fraudsters in prison. I know how to build a case. I stood up, steadier now that I had a purpose. Don't process any more transactions on my accounts. Flag everything. And Linda, thank you for paying attention, for caring enough to look. Her eyes glistened. Margaret was my friend too. She'd never forgive me if I let something happen to you. I drove home to my house on Point Grey Road in a daze. The rain had intensified, typical Vancouver March, and the wipers beat a steady rhythm against the windshield. My mind was racing through the possibilities, the evidence I'd need, the confrontation that was coming. Teresa's car was in the driveway when I pulled up, a white Honda CR-V that I now realized I'd been paying for. She probably saw it as an advance on her inheritance. I sat in the car for a moment, composing myself. Teresa had been living in my home for 8 months. She'd cooked my meals, helped me with my physical therapy, driven me to doctor's appointments. I'd trusted her. I'd even grown fond of her, appreciated her cheerful efficiency and the way she didn't treat me like a fragile old man. All a performance, all a carefully crafted lie. I walked into my own home feeling like a stranger. Teresa was in the kitchen, preparing what smelled like beef stew. She turned with a bright smile that I now recognized as rehearsed. Mr. McPherson, you're back early. How was the bank? Fine, I said, keeping my voice neutral. Just needed to check on some investments. Your brother called while you were out. He wants to come by this weekend. Something about helping you organize your paperwork? I'll bet he does, I thought. Probably wants to check on their progress. See how close they are to bleeding me dry. Sounds good. I'm feeling a bit tired, Teresa. Think I'll lie down for a while. Of course. I'll bring you some tea in an hour. I went to my study and locked the door. The room still smelled faintly of Margaret's perfume. She'd used this space for her painting, and her easel still stood in the corner, a half-finished landscape of Stanley Park that she'd never complete. What would you do, Maggie? I asked silently. But I already knew. Margaret had always been the fierce one, the protector. She would have confronted them immediately. Consequences be damned. But I wasn't Margaret. I was a methodical man who'd built his career on patience and documentation. I needed evidence. I pulled out my phone and called my lawyer, David Chen. He'd handled our wills, Margaret's estate, all our legal work for 30 years. He answered on the second ring. "Bill, how are you doing?" "I need your help, David. Something's happened, and I need to be very careful about how I handle it." I told him everything. The forged power of attorney, the stolen money, my suspicions about Douglas and Teresa. When I finished, there was a long silence. "Bill, this is serious. We need to involve the police." "Not yet. I need to know how deep this goes. I need them to admit what they've done." "That's risky. If they realize you know." "They won't. Not until I'm ready." David sighed, the sound of a man who knew he wasn't going to win this argument. "All right. Here's what we do. Tomorrow, you come to my office. We revoke any existing powers of attorney on file, update your will to explicitly exclude Douglas, and create a paper trail showing your mental competency. I'll have Dr. Yamamoto do a cognitive assessment, something official that will stand up in court. And the evidence? I'll reach out to a private investigator I've worked with, former RCMP. She's good, discreet. But Bill, if at any point you feel unsafe, you call the police. No amount of money is worth your life." "Understood." After I hung up, I sat at Margaret's old desk and began to plan. I needed to act normal, unsuspicious, while gathering enough evidence to ensure Douglas and Teresa couldn't wiggle out of this. The forensic accountant in me knew exactly how to trace the money, document the fraud, build an airtight case. But first, I needed to confirm one thing. That night, I pretended to take my evening medications while Teresa watched. She always watched, I realize now, making sure I swallowed everything. But tonight, I palmed the pills and spit them into the toilet later. The next morning, I asked Teresa to drive me to the pharmacy. I claimed I needed a refill on my blood pressure medication, but what I really needed was information. Jung Park had been my pharmacist for 15 years. He knew my medical history better than most doctors. While Teresa browsed the vitamin aisle, I leaned across the counter. "Jung, I need you to look at something for me." I handed him the small plastic bag containing the pills I'd pretended to take the night before. "Can you tell me what these are?" He examined them carefully, then typed something into his computer. His face went pale. "Mr. Macpherson, these aren't your blood pressure medication." "What are they?" "Lorazepam, a benzodiazepine. At this dosage." He checked the computer again. "You've been taking roughly 3 times the normal prescribed amount. Long-term use at this level can cause memory problems, confusion, cognitive decline." The room seemed to tilt. They weren't just stealing my money, they were drugging me, making me confused, forgetful, easier to manipulate, creating evidence of the cognitive decline they'd need to justify the power of attorney. "How long would it take to affect my memory?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "At this dosage?" "A few months. You'd start forgetting things, maybe seem confused in conversations. Your family might notice you weren't yourself." Jung looked at me with growing alarm. "Mr. Macpherson, who gave you these pills?" "My caregiver. She's been managing my medications." "You need to report this immediately." "This is..." "Not yet. But I need you to document everything. Date, time, what you found. Can you do that?" Jung nodded slowly. "I'll write up a formal report. But please be careful." Teresa was approaching the counter, a basket full of vitamins and supplements. I smiled at her, the kind of absent-minded smile that someone with cognitive decline might give, and let her lead me back to the car. Over the next 2 weeks, I pretended to take the drugs while actually flushing them. My head cleared remarkably fast once the lorazepam was out of my system. I could think again, remember things, see the manipulation that had been invisible before. The private investigator David hired was named Rachel Whitmore, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who'd spent 20 years with the RCMP Financial Crimes Unit. She traced the numbered company to a web of offshore accounts, shell corporations, and ultimately back to Douglas. The evidence was damning. But I wanted more. I wanted them to say it, to admit what they'd done. The opportunity came on a Saturday in April. Douglas arrived at my house for his paperwork organizing visit, and I'd prepared everything carefully. Hidden cameras in the study, the kitchen, the living room, recording devices approved by Rachel and documented by David. Teresa made coffee while Douglas and I sat in the study. He looked nervous, I noticed. Good. Maybe he sensed something was wrong. Bill, I've been thinking, Douglas said, spreading papers across Margaret's desk. With your health declining, maybe it's time to simplify your finances. Consolidate everything into one account that Teresa can manage for you. My health is fine, I said mildly. Well, Teresa mentioned you've been having memory issues, forgetting conversations, misplacing things. It's nothing to be ashamed of, but we need to plan for the future. I let the silence stretch. Outside, a crow cawed from the old cedar tree in the backyard. Finally, I spoke. I'm changing my will, Douglas. His head snapped up. What? I've decided to leave everything to the Margaret McPherson Foundation. Cancer research. She would have wanted that. The mask slipped. Just for a second, I saw raw fury in my brother's eyes before he controlled it. Bill, that's a major decision. Have you talked to anyone about this? My lawyer. We're meeting Monday to finalize everything. Douglas stood up abruptly. I need to make a call. Excuse me. He stepped into the hallway, but I could hear him through the door. The recording devices would catch every word. We have a problem, he hissed into his phone. Teresa, presumably. He's changing the will. Everything to charity. We need to move faster. A pause. I don't care if it's risky. We've already taken too long. The POA didn't work. The money transfers are going to get flagged eventually. And now this. We need to accelerate the plan. Another pause. Tonight. Increase the dose. Make it look like he fell and hit his head. Confusion, unsteadiness, tragic accident. We can contest any new will based on his mental state, but we need to act now. He came back into the study wearing a concerned smile. Bill, I'm worried about you. Making major decisions like this without family input. Maybe we should schedule an appointment with Dr. Morrison. Get a professional opinion. That's thoughtful of you, Douglas. My voice was steady, but inside I was breaking. My own brother, my only living family. Planning my murder like it was a business transaction. I should go. Let you rest. He hugged me, something he hadn't done in years, and I felt nothing but cold emptiness. Take care of yourself, big brother. After he left, I sat in the study for a long time, watching the afternoon light fade over the mountains. 40 years ago, I'd taught Douglas to ride a bike in our parents' driveway in North Vancouver. I'd lent him money for his first car, his first apartment, his failed business ventures. I'd loved him despite his flaws, believed in him despite his failures. And he'd planned to kill me for money. I called Rachel Whitmore. I have enough. Are you certain? He's planning to have Teresa increase my medication dosage tonight. Make it look like an accident. I'll have police at your door within the hour. No, let her try. I want her caught in the act. Mr. McPherson, I've been a forensic accountant for 40 years, Rachel. I know how to build a case that won't fall apart in court. I'll pretend to take whatever she gives me, then call you the moment she leaves. We'll have the evidence, the confession, and the attempted murder all documented. Rachel was quiet for a long moment. You're a brave man, Bill. No, I'm a very angry one. That evening, Teresa prepared my dinner with extra care. Beef bourguignon, one of my favorites. I noticed her hands trembling slightly as she set the plate in front of me. I added your medication to the food, she said, too casually, just to make it easier for you to take. I ate slowly, pushing the food around, actually eating very little. I'd already taken an antidote that Dr. Yamamoto had prescribed, something to counteract the lorazepam, but I wanted her to think she'd succeeded. After dinner, I stumbled slightly, getting up from the table. I let my speech slur a little, knocked over a glass, reaching for it. Mr. McPherson, you seem unsteady tonight. Maybe you should go to bed early. Yes, I think you're right. I shuffled toward the stairs, leaning heavily on the banister. Teresa? Yes? Thank you for taking such good care of me. The words tasted like poison, but I saw satisfaction flash across her face. Pride in a job well done. Of course, Mr. Macpherson. That's what I'm here for. I made it to my bedroom and closed the door. Then I waited, listening. 15 minutes later, I heard her footsteps on the stairs, pausing outside my door, then continuing to her room. I heard her phone click, a muffled conversation. It's done. He's out. You should see him tomorrow. We'll start the paperwork immediately. I took out my phone and texted Rachel. Now. The police arrived within 20 minutes. Teresa was arrested in her bathrobe, clutching her phone, face frozen in disbelief. Douglas was picked up at his condo in Yaletown an hour later, still in his pajamas. I watched them load Teresa into the police car from my living room window. She looked up at the house, saw me watching, and the mask finally fell completely. The cheerful caregiver was gone. In her place was someone hard, calculating, furious at being caught. I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no relief, just emptiness where my brother used to be. The trial took place 8 months later, in the fall, when the leaves were turning gold along the Sea to Sky Highway, and the first snow was dusting the North Shore Mountains. I attended every day, sat in the gallery, and watched Douglas and Teresa try to blame each other for everything. The evidence was overwhelming. Bank records, phone logs, the forged documents, the recorded confession, Young Park's toxicology report on the medications, my testimony about the drugging and the planned accident. Douglas's lawyer argued that Teresa had manipulated him, that he'd been an unwitting participant in her scheme. Teresa's lawyer claimed Douglas had coerced her, threatened her job and her immigration status. The jury saw through both arguments. The paper trail was too clear, too methodical. This had been a partnership, carefully planned over months. Douglas was convicted of fraud over $5,000, forgery, conspiracy to commit murder, and administering a noxious substance. He received 14 years. Teresa was convicted of the same charges plus theft and breach of trust. She received 16 years because the prosecution proved she'd done this before, to an elderly man in Edmonton who died before the fraud was discovered. When the verdict was read, Douglas looked at me from the defendant's box. For just a moment, I saw my baby brother again, the kid who'd looked up to me, who'd cried when I left for university, who'd asked me to be best man at his wedding. Then the mask came back, and he looked away. After the sentencing, I met with Linda Okonkwo and Rachel Whitmore at a quiet restaurant in Gastown. Rain was falling again, and the cobblestone streets gleamed under the streetlights. What now? Linda asked. I'd been thinking about that question for months. Margaret always wanted to do something meaningful with our money. She talked about a foundation, something that would outlive us. I'm going to make that happen. The Margaret McPherson Foundation? Yes, but not just for cancer research. I looked out at the rain-slicked streets. I want to fund financial literacy programs for seniors, fraud prevention education, support for victims of elder abuse, and training for bank employees, pharmacists, doctors, anyone who might spot the warning signs before it's too late. Linda's eyes filled with tears. Bill, that's beautiful. It's necessary. I was lucky. I had you, Linda. You paid attention when something felt wrong. Most people don't have someone like that. I want to change that. Rachel raised her glass. To Margaret. And to all the people you're going to help. To Margaret, I echoed. And to paying it forward. 6 months after the trial, I sold the house in Kitsilano. Too many memories, both good and bad. I bought a smaller place in North Vancouver, closer to where I'd grown up, with a view of the mountains and the harbor. I volunteer now, 3 days a week, at a seniors center in the downtown east side. I teach workshops on financial safety, help people read their bank statements, explain the warning signs of fraud. Most of the attendees are elderly, isolated, exactly the kind of targets that Douglas and Teresa would have loved. Trust, but verify, I tell them. Even family, especially family. Some of them think I'm paranoid. But then I tell them my story, and I watch their faces change. I see them start to think about their own situations, their own families, the the people who have access to their accounts and their medications. Last month, a woman named Eleanor came up to me after a workshop. She was 73, well-dressed, clearly uncomfortable. "Mr. McPherson, I think. I think my grandson might be using my credit card without permission. I've noticed charges I don't remember making, but he says I just forgot. He says my memory isn't what it used to be." I sat with Eleanor for 2 hours. We went through her statements together, identified over $12,000 in fraudulent charges, and I helped her file a report with the police and her bank. 3 weeks later, she called to tell me her grandson had been arrested. He'd been stealing from her for over a year. "You saved me," she said, her voice cracking. "Just like your friend saved you." I thought about Linda, about her trembling hands and her determination to tell me the truth, even though it could have cost her everything. I thought about Margaret, who'd spent her final years painting landscapes and talking about the good we could do in the world if we just tried. And I thought about Douglas, sitting in a prison cell in Mission, probably still convinced that he was the victim in all of this. Every month, I receive a letter from him. I never open them. Some betrayals are too deep for forgiveness, and I've learned that closure doesn't always come from reconciliation. Sometimes it comes from letting go, from building something new out of the wreckage of what you've lost. The Margaret McPherson Foundation funded its first research grant last spring. We've trained over 200 bank employees in elder abuse detection. We've helped 63 seniors recover from financial fraud. We've prevented, by our estimates, over $4 million in losses. Not bad for an angry old accountant with a grudge. On what would have been our 45th wedding anniversary, I visited Margaret's grave at Capilano View Cemetery. The mountains were stunning that day. Fresh snow on the peaks, and the kind of crisp autumn air that makes you glad to be alive. "I kept my promise," I told her headstone. "I'm using the money for good. I'm helping people, and I'm not letting what Douglas did destroy me." A crow landed on a nearby branch, watching me with curious eyes. Maggie had loved crows, called them the cleverest birds in the city. I liked to think it was a sign. "I miss you every day," I said. "But I'm okay. I'm going to be okay." And I was. At 67, I'd learned that family isn't always blood. Linda Okonkwo had become one of my closest friends. Rachel Whitmore and I had dinner together once a month. Dr. Yamamoto, Jung Park, David Chen. All of them had become the family I chose, the people who'd stood by me when my own brother tried to kill me. The workshops continued every week. The foundation grew. The letters from Douglas piled up, unopened, in a box I kept meaning to throw away but never did. Some nights, I still woke up thinking about Teresa's smile as she watched me take those pills, about Douglas's voice saying, "We need to accelerate the plan." The nightmares hadn't stopped completely, and I wasn't sure they ever would. But every time I helped someone like Eleanor, every time I trained a bank teller to spot the signs of fraud, every time I saw the foundation's name attached to a research grant or an education program, I felt Margaret's presence, felt her approval, felt the weight of our 43 years together transformed into something that would outlive us both. That was legacy. That was love. That was survival. And every morning, when I woke up in my North Vancouver apartment with the mountains outside my window, I took my medications. The real ones now, from a pharmacy I trust, verified by people I trust. Trust, but verify. The lesson I teach others. The lesson I learned the hard way. My brother tried to kill me for $2.8 million. My pharmacist noticed something was wrong. My bank manager risked her career to tell me the truth. In the end, the money didn't matter. The people did. And maybe that's the real lesson. Maybe that's what I tell the seniors at my workshops, what I tell the bank employees at the training sessions, what I tell myself when the nightmares wake me at 3 a.m. Pay attention to the people around you. Notice when something feels wrong. Trust your instincts. And remember that sometimes the person trying to protect you isn't family at all, while the person trying to destroy you is. I learned that lesson at 66 years old, nearly too late. Now, I spend my days making sure others learn it sooner. For Margaret, for Linda, for everyone who deserves a second chance. And it is enough.